Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Builder. Evan Levine stood in the corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the sunrise paint Chicago's skyline in shades of amber and gold. The view never got old. Neither did the satisfaction of knowing he'd earned it. 10 years ago, this building hadn't existed. Procter Manufacturing had been a struggling mid-tier industrial supplier operating out of a warehouse in Gary, Indiana. Frank Procter, the aging owner, had been weeks from bankruptcy when Evan married his daughter Kathy. Evan remembered that first dinner at the Procter house. Frank had been distant, measuring him with suspicious eyes. "So you're the boyfriend. Kathy says you're some kind of engineer." "Mechanical engineer, MIT," Evan had replied. "But I also studied industrial design and business strategy. I've been looking at your company's financials, with Kathy's permission. You got a solid foundation, Mr. Procter, but you're stuck in 20th century thinking." Frank's expression had hardened. "Is that so? Your core product, industrial valve systems, is sound. But you're competing on price in a market where you'll always lose to overseas manufacturers. What you need is innovation. Patents. Proprietary technology that makes you irreplaceable." That conversation had lasted until 3 in the morning. By dawn, Frank had offered him a job. By the end of the year, Evan had revolutionized their product line with smart valve technology that could predict failures before they happened. The patents were worth millions. By year 3, Frank had made him COO. By year 5, Procter Manufacturing had gone from $17 million in revenue to over $300 million. Evan had done that. Every strategic pivot, every innovation, every major client relationship. His fingerprints were on all of it. He'd rebuilt this company from the ground up while Frank's name stayed on the door. He'd never minded. Frank was family now. Kathy was pregnant with their second child. His son, James, was 4 years old and called Frank Papa Frank with genuine affection. The office door opened. Frank's assistant, Leah Manning, stood there with an uncomfortable expression. "Evan, Frank wants to see you in his office." Now, something in her tone made Evan's instincts prickle. Leah had worked for Frank for 20 years. She'd seen him transform the company. They had a good relationship. But now she wouldn't meet his eyes. "Everything okay, Leah? Just please go see him." Frank's office was at the opposite end of the floor. As Evan walked through the corridor lined with patents and awards, most of them his innovations, he noticed something odd. The executive conference room was occupied. Through the frosted glass, he could see figures, but couldn't make out who they were. Frank's door was open. The old man sat behind his desk, looking older than his 68 years. He didn't stand when Evan entered. "Close the door and sit down, Evan." Evan closed the door, but remained standing. "What's going on, Frank?" Frank pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. "We're letting you go." The words didn't register at first. Evan stared at the folder, a severance package, then at his father-in-law. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's time for new leadership. The board has decided to go in a different direction." "The board?" Evan's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "Frank, you are the board. You hold 60% of the shares. I hold 15%. Kathy has 10. Your cousin Russell has the rest. There's no board decision without you. The decision is made." Frank's face was stone. "You'll receive 6 months' salary and your accrued benefits. Your equity will be bought out at current valuation." "It's generous." Evan's mind raced. Current valuation meant the private valuation from last quarter, $333 million. His 15% stake would be worth just under $50 million. But he knew the company was worth more. Much more. They were in talks with 2 major conglomerates about acquisition, offers starting at $600 million. This is about the acquisition, isn't it? You want to push me out before the sale goes through, so you don't have to split it fairly. This is about what's best for the company. Frank stood. "I need your key card, your laptop, and your phone. Company property. My phone has personal data. IT will transfer your personal files. Key card and laptop." Now, the dismissal in Frank's tone ignited something cold in Evan's chest. This wasn't a business decision. This was personal. This was calculated. Does Kathy know about this? Frank's jaw tightened. "This is business, Evan. Keep your family drama out of my company." "Your company?" After everything Evan had built, He pulled his key card from his wallet, set his laptop on the desk. I'll need my phone for the drive home. Fine. Drop it with security on your way out. Frank sat back down, already looking at other papers as if Evan had ceased to exist. Evan walked back to his office in a daze. Through the conference room glass, he now saw who was inside. Kelvin Proctor, Frank's younger brother, along with 2 lawyers and Russell Reed, Frank's cousin who sat on the board. Kelvin, the brother who'd spent 20 years bouncing between failed businesses and bad investments. The brother Frank had bailed out again and again. The brother who told Evan at last year's Christmas party, drunk and bitter, "You're not real family. You just married in." Evan understood. He packed his desk methodically. Photos of Kathy and James. His MIT diploma. A trophy from a regional engineering competition. Personal notebooks. As he worked, his mind was already 10 steps ahead. 3 months ago, he'd noticed irregularities in the books. Nothing major, just small discrepancies in expense reports. He'd mentioned it to Frank, who'd waved it off as accounting errors. But Evan had started keeping his own records. He'd learned from his father, a prosecutor, that if something seemed off, it usually was. 2 months ago, he'd overheard Frank and Kelvin arguing in Frank's office. The door had been ajar. Kelvin's voice. "When are you going to give me a real position? I'm your brother, for Christ's sake. He's just some kid who got lucky marrying your daughter." Frank's response. "Evan built this company. I'm not pushing him out." Kelvin. "Then we're both going to miss out. You think those acquisition offers will stay on the table forever?" That conversation had made Evan start digging deeper. What he'd found over the past 8 weeks had been illuminating. Now, standing in his gutted office, Evan pulled out his personal phone, not the company iPhone on his desk. This was a burner he'd bought last month, after his suspicions had crystallized into certainty. He opened the encrypted email app and reviewed the draft he prepared. 27 attachments. Documents, recordings, financial analyses, photographs. Everything he discovered, organized, verified, and legally documented. The recipients. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the Illinois Attorney General's Office, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the IRS, ProPublica's investigative journalism team, the 3 companies currently in acquisition talks with Procter Manufacturing. His finger hovered over the send button. Through his office window, he could see into Frank's office. Frank was on the phone, smiling now. Relaxed. Evan pressed send. Then he picked up the company iPhone, his box of personal items, and walked toward the elevator. As he passed Frank's office, he heard his father-in-law's voice through the door. "Yes, he's gone. Made it easy, actually. Didn't fight at all. Now listen about bringing Kelvin in for his position. We need to move fast before the Silvermark deal closes. They specifically wanted Evan's team, but we'll tell them Kelvin's been co-managing everything. They'll never know the difference." Evan kept walking. He didn't smile, didn't react. He simply got in the elevator, rode down 42 floors, dropped the iPhone with a confused security guard, and walked out into the Chicago morning. His real phone buzzed. Confirmation that the emails had been delivered. By lunch, Frank Proctor's world would begin to collapse. By dinner, the dominoes would be falling too fast to stop. Evan climbed into his Audi and drove home, his mind already on phase 2. Chapter 2, The Family. Kathy was in the kitchen when Evan arrived home, an hour earlier than usual. She looked up from her laptop, surprise flickering across her face before morphing into something else. Guilt. She knew. "Evan, you're home early." He set his box down on the counter. "Your father fired me." Kathy closed her laptop. She was still beautiful. The same sharp intelligence in her eyes that had drawn him to her at that engineering conference a decade ago. She'd been working for a consulting firm then, brilliant and ambitious. She'd left that career after James was born, saying she wanted to focus on family. Evan had supported the decision, never questioning it. Now he questioned everything. "He called me this morning," she said quietly. "He wanted me to hear it from him first. And you didn't call me? Didn't warn me? He's my father, Evan. He said it was a business decision, that the company needed new direction." New direction. Evan laughed bitterly. "He's installing Kelvin in my position. Your uncle Kelvin, who's never successfully run anything in his life. That's the new direction." Kathy stood, hand protectively over her pregnant belly. Maybe Kelvin deserves a chance. Maybe Dad feels obligated. Kathy, I built that company. Every major innovation, every strategic partnership, every patent, that was me. Your father was weeks from bankruptcy when we met. You know this. I know you worked hard. I saved his company. Evan's voice rose. Then he forced himself to calm down. Anger wouldn't help. I'm not upset about the firing itself. If Frank wanted to retire and sell, we could have discussed it. I'm upset about the betrayal, the lies, and the fact that my wife apparently knew and said nothing. Tears welled in Kathy's eyes. You don't understand what it's like. Dad built that company himself. It's his legacy. Maybe he felt like you were taking it from him. I was giving it to him, making his dream bigger than he ever imagined. And he repaid me by stabbing me in the back. Evan pulled out his phone. But that's okay, because I'm not the naive kid who married into your family anymore. What does that mean? It means I've been paying attention. 3 months ago, I noticed some irregularities in the books. I mentioned it to your father. He dismissed it, so I kept looking. Kathy's face went pale. Evan, what did you do? I did what any ethical COO would do. I investigated. And you know what I found? He pulled up a document on his phone. Your father and Kelvin have been running a parallel set of books for the past 18 months. They've been inflating revenues and hiding liabilities to artificially boost the company's valuation. That's not. They've been stealing from the company's pension fund. Small amounts at first, but over the past year, they've siphoned off nearly $12 million. They're using it to pay off Kelvin's gambling debts and fund a separate shell company they're planning to use after they sell Procter Manufacturing. Kathy sat down heavily. No, Dad wouldn't. Your dad is committing securities fraud, Kathy. He's lying to potential buyers about the company's financial health. When Silvermark or Quantum Industries runs their due diligence, they'll discover the truth. And everyone involved will go to prison. If you knew all this, why didn't you say something before? I was trying to protect him. Evan's composure cracked. He's your father, my son's grandfather. I documented everything, and I was planning to confront him privately, give him a chance to make it right before the sale went through. I thought maybe he'd made mistakes, that Kelvin had led him astray. I was trying to find a solution that didn't destroy our family. And now he fired me to cover his tracks. He's going to blame everything on me once it comes out. That's why he wanted me gone. So he could paint me as the corrupt COO who betrayed the family trust. Kathy's hand shook. What did you do, Evan? This morning, after he fired me, I sent everything to the SEC, the FBI, the Attorney General, and the IRS. I also sent it to ProPublica's investigative team and to the 3 companies bidding on Procter Manufacturing. By now, federal agents are probably already reviewing the case. You reported my father to the FBI? Kathy's voice was strangled. He could go to prison. He should go to prison. He committed crimes. He stole from his employees' retirement funds. He committed fraud that could destroy dozens of families who depend on that pension money. He's my father, and I'm your husband, the man you promised to stand by. But the moment things got difficult, you chose him over me. You knew he was planning to fire me, and you said nothing. Kathy stood, backing away. You need to leave. I need to think. This is my house too, Kathy. I've been paying the mortgage. Get out. Her voice was almost a scream. Get out of my house. Evan stared at his wife, at the woman he'd loved for 10 years, and saw a stranger. He grabbed his box of belongings and walked toward the door. Evan, Kathy called. He turned. Her face was streaked with tears. I'm sorry it came to this, but you can't expect me to choose you over my family. I am your family, Evan said quietly. Or I thought I was. He left. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Evan checked into a hotel near Lincoln Park. As he sat in the anonymous room, his phone began buzzing with calls and texts. Frank, Kelvin, Russell Reed, Kathy again, his former assistant, Leah Manning. He ignored them all. Instead, he called his father. Jonathan Levine picked up on the first ring. Evan, everything okay? No, Dad. Everything's not okay. Evan filled him in, his father listening with the patient attention that had made him a successful federal prosecutor for 30 years before retiring. When Evan finished, Jonathan was quiet for a moment. You did the right thing. Difficult, but right. Those pension funds, You probably saved a lot of people from losing their retirement. Kathy kicked me out. She's scared and confused. Give her time. But Evan, you need to lawyer up immediately. Frank's going to come after you hard. He'll claim you were involved in the fraud, that you're trying to frame him to cover your own crimes. I documented everything. Dates, times, recordings. Good, but get a lawyer. And Evan, I'm proud of you. I know this isn't easy, but you stood up for what was right. They talked for another hour, Jonathan walking him through what to expect. When they hung up, Evan felt steadier. His father was right. This would get worse before it got better. He ordered dinner from room service and turned on the news. Nothing yet. That would change. Around 9 p.m., his phone rang with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Levine, this is Special Agent Teresa Hatch with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I need to speak with you about Procter Manufacturing. I've been expecting your call. Can you come to our office tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. I'll be there. After he hung up, Evan opened his laptop and accessed a secure server he'd set up weeks ago. The backup files were all there. Everything he'd sent to the authorities, plus additional evidence he'd held back. His insurance policy. The next morning, he met with Special Agent Hatch and her partner, Eric Hammond. They spent 4 hours going through his evidence. Financial records, email exchanges, recorded conversations from the office's security system, which Evan had designed and had administrative access to. The agent's expressions grew grimmer as they progressed through the materials. This is extensive, Hatch said. You've essentially done our job for us. I wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity. Frank Procter and his brother Kelvin have been defrauding investors and stealing from employees for at least 18 months. Possibly longer. Why didn't you come forward sooner? He's my father-in-law. I kept hoping I'd find an innocent explanation. By the time I realized the scope of what they were doing, I needed to document everything carefully. I knew Frank would try to blame me once it came out. Emma nodded. He's already doing that. His lawyer called us this morning, claiming you're a disgruntled employee fabricating evidence after being fired. Everything is verifiable. Bank records, pension fund statements, emails to potential buyers containing false financial data. It's all real. I didn't fabricate anything. We know. We've been running preliminary verification since yesterday afternoon. Mr. Levine, we're going to need you to testify before grand jury. Whatever you need. As Evan left the FBI office, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. You've made a big mistake. We're going to destroy you. He forwarded it to Agent Hatch and kept walking. Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. The news broke 3 days later. Procter Manufacturing CEO under federal investigation for fraud. The ProPublica article was devastating, methodically laying out the evidence Evan had provided. Within hours, it was picked up by the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and CNBC. By evening, news vans were parked outside Procter Manufacturing's headquarters and Frank Procter's Winnetka mansion. The acquisition talks collapsed immediately. Silvermark and Quantum Industries both issued statements withdrawing their offers and expressing concern about material misrepresentations. The third bidder, a private equity firm called Harbor Bridge Capital, announced they were exploring legal action for fraud. Procter Manufacturing stock, they'd done a partial IPO 2 years ago at Evan's suggestion, plummeted 43% before trading was halted. Evan watched it all from his hotel room, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. He'd built something extraordinary, and Frank's greed had turned it to ash. His phone rang. Leah Manning. Leah, how are things at the office? Chaos. Her voice was tight. Federal agents showed up this morning with warrants. They've seized everything, computers, filing cabinets, Frank's personal files. Frank and Kelvin are in damage control mode. They're claiming you fabricated everything, that you stole money and are framing them. I expected that. Evan, there's something else. Something you need to know. She lowered her voice. Kathy wasn't on it. Evan's stomach dropped. What? I shouldn't be telling you this, but you deserve to know. Kathy has been meeting with Frank and Kelvin for months. I saw emails. She was helping them plan how to push you out. She was the one who suggested firing you right before the acquisition, so they could negotiate the sale without you and cut you out of the windfall. Why would she do that? Money, I think. And Frank convinced her you were getting too powerful, that you were trying to take over the company. He poisoned her against you, Evan. I'm sorry. After they hung up, Evan sat in the dark hotel room, trying to process the betrayal. His wife, the mother of his child, she'd been working against him for months. His phone buzzed again. A text from Kathy. We need to talk. About James. About custody. So that was her play. She was going to try to take his son. Evan made a decision. He'd been playing defense, reacting to Frank's moves. It was time to go on offense. He picked up his phone and called a number he'd found 3 weeks ago during his investigation. A number he'd hoped he wouldn't need to use. Alfonso Hodges speaking. Mr. Hodges, my name is Evan Levine. I understand you used to work for Proctor Manufacturing. I'd like to talk to you about Frank Proctor and some transactions from 2019. There was a long pause. I thought no one would ever ask about that. Yes, Mr. Levine. I think we should talk. Chapter 5. The Hidden Pieces. Alfonso Hodges met Evan at a coffee shop in Naperville, far from downtown Chicago. He was in his 60s, gray-haired and cautious, with the demeanor of a man who'd learned to keep secrets. I worked as Proctor Manufacturing's CFO from 2015 to 2019, Alfonso began. Best job I ever had. Until Frank asked me to do something I couldn't do. What did he ask you? To hide some transactions. Not major amounts at first. Maybe 50,000 here, 100,000 there. Frank said they were legitimate business expenses, but needed to be kept off the main books for competitive reasons. I was uncomfortable, but he was persuasive. Said it was just temporary. But it wasn't temporary. No, it escalated. By 2019, we were talking about millions of dollars being moved through shell companies. I realized Frank was building a parallel business structure. When I asked him about it directly, he told me it was none of my concern and to do my job. So you quit. I was fired. In July 2019, Frank called me into his office and said they were restructuring the finance department. He gave me a severance package with a very aggressive non-disclosure agreement. If I talked about anything I'd seen, I'd lose the severance and face legal action. Did you sign it? I did. I was 60 years old, Mr. Levine. I needed that money for retirement. And I convinced myself that maybe I'd misunderstood, that maybe it was all legal and I was just being paranoid. Alfonso's face tightened. But when I saw the news this week, I realized I'd been right. Frank's been running a scam for years, and I help him do it. Evan pulled out his laptop. Mr. Hodges, I need you to walk me through everything you remember. Names, dates, amounts, shell companies, all of it. I've already sent evidence to the FBI, but if Frank has been doing this since 2019 or earlier, there's more they need to know. They spent 3 hours in that coffee shop, Alfonso recounting details he'd kept buried for 5 years. Evan documented everything, occasionally cross-referencing it with his own evidence. A picture emerged that was worse than he'd imagined. Frank hadn't been preparing for retirement or planning a comfortable sale. He'd been systematically looting his own company for years, building a private fortune through shell companies and offshore accounts, while employees believed they were contributing to a growing pension fund. There's someone else you need to talk to, Alfonso said as they prepared to leave. Robbie Casey. He was the VP of operations before you came on board. Frank pushed him out in 2017, right around when you started making waves with your innovations. Why did Frank push him out? Robbie asked too many questions. He noticed discrepancies in vendor payments, money going to companies that didn't seem to exist. When he tried to investigate, Frank fired him. Robbie got a severance package with the same aggressive NDA I got. Evan got Robbie Casey's contact information and drove back to Chicago, his mind racing. Frank's betrayal ran deeper than a simple case of firing his son-in-law. This was systematic long-term fraud. And Evan was beginning to realize that his role at the company might have been part of Frank's plan all along. Think about it. A brilliant young engineer marries into the family, transforms the company with innovations and patents, drives massive growth. The company's value explodes. Then, at the peak, Frank sells everything, keeping the wealth for himself while the engineer takes the fall for any financial irregularities. Evan had been the perfect cover. That night, he met with his lawyer, a sharp woman named Tracy Story who specialized in white-collar crime defense. She'd been recommended by his father. Your father-in-law is going scorched earth, Tracy warned. He's filed a civil suit claiming you embezzled funds and stole proprietary information. He's also trying to get a restraining order to keep you away from your son. On what grounds? He's claiming you're mentally unstable and dangerous. His lawyers are pointing to the fact that you reported him to federal authorities as evidence of paranoia and delusion. Evan felt rage building. He's trying to destroy me. Yes, but we can fight this. Your evidence is solid. The FBI is taking your claims seriously. And I've got some good news. The judge denied the emergency restraining order. Frank couldn't provide any actual evidence you're a danger to James. What about custody? That's trickier. Kathy is filed for divorce and full custody. In Illinois, the court will look at what's in the best interest of the child. You're going to need to show you're a stable, present father despite everything that's happening. I am stable. I'm the victim here. I know that. But perception matters in family court. Frank and Kathy are going to paint you as a corporate criminal who betrayed the family. We need to flip that narrative. After leaving Tracy's office, Evan drove to Winnetka, to the house he'd been paying the mortgage on for 7 years. He needed to see his son. Kathy answered the door, her face guarded. You're not supposed to be here. I want to see James. It's not a good time. He's my son, Kathy. You can't keep him from me. After what you did to my father. What I did. Your father committed fraud. He stole from his own employees. I reported a crime, Kathy. That's not betrayal. That's integrity. Daddy. James appeared behind Kathy, his face lighting up. You're home. Evan's throat tightened. Hey, buddy. I missed you. Kathy hesitated, then stepped aside. 30 minutes. That's all. Evan spent the next half hour playing with his 4-year-old son, building block towers and reading stories, trying to be present despite everything crashing down around him. When it was time to go, James hugged him tight. When are you coming back, Daddy? Soon, buddy. I promise. As Evan left, he saw Frank's car pull into the driveway. The old man climbed out, his face hard. They locked eyes across the lawn. You're finished, Evan, Frank called. You thought you could destroy me? I built this empire. You're just an employee. You'll be forgotten in a month. Evan smiled coldly. Check your offshore accounts, Frank. I think you'll find some interesting surprises. Frank's face went pale. Evan climbed into his car and drove away. That afternoon, while working with Alfonso Hodges, he'd done more than just document Frank's crimes. He'd also gained access to bank accounts Frank didn't know Evan knew about, and he'd made some strategic transfers. Chapter 6. The Trap. 2 weeks later, the grand jury indicted Frank Proctor and Kelvin Proctor on 17 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and theft. The U.S. Attorney's press conference was carried live on all major networks. Evan wasn't charged. The FBI had verified his evidence and determined he'd been a whistleblower, not an accomplice. But Frank wasn't going down without a fight. This is a witch hunt, Frank declared in his own press conference, flanked by expensive lawyers. My son-in-law, Evan Levine, is the real criminal. He's been embezzling from Proctor Manufacturing for years. He fabricated evidence to cover his tracks when I discovered his scheme. I fired him, and this is his revenge. The media ate it up. Cable news devoted segments to the Proctor family scandal. Financial experts debated whether Evan was a hero or a con artist. Social media split into camps. Evan ignored the noise and kept working. His meeting with Robbie Casey had been illuminating. The former VP of operations had confirmed Alfonso's story and added new details. But more importantly, Robbie had kept copies of documents, insurance, he called it, that showed Frank had been planning this kind of scheme for much longer than anyone realized. Frank approached me in 2016, Robbie had explained, wanted me to approve vendor payments to shell companies. When I refused, he started marginalizing me. By 2017, I was fired. I thought I was the problem. Now I realize he was looking for someone he could control. And then I showed up, Evans said. Young, ambitious, grateful for the opportunity. He must have thought I'd be perfect, smart enough to grow the company, naive enough to be manipulated. Except you weren't naive. No, my father's a prosecutor. He taught me to trust my instincts and document everything. Evan had taken that lesson to heart. Every conversation with Frank, every email, every financial transaction, He'd kept meticulous records. Not because he'd suspected betrayal at first, but because it was simply his nature to be thorough. Now those records were his salvation. But Evan had also discovered something else, something he'd been holding back from the FBI. He needed to time it perfectly. Frank's offshore accounts were more extensive than even the federal investigators had realized. Evan had found them by following digital breadcrumbs through the shell companies. Accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. Nearly $40 million that Frank had siphoned off over the years. The FBI would find those accounts eventually. But Evan had given them a nudge by anonymously tipping off an investigative journalist at the Financial Times. The article would drop tomorrow, putting enormous pressure on Frank right before his preliminary hearing. But that wasn't the real trap. The real trap was much more elegant. Evan had discovered that Kelvin wasn't just Frank's accomplice. He was also Frank's fall guy. In the shell company documents, Kelvin's name appeared everywhere, while Frank's appeared almost nowhere. Frank had set up his own brother to take the majority of the legal blame. Evan had copied those documents and sent them anonymously to Kelvin's lawyer. He watched the explosion unfold on his hotel room TV. Kelvin's lawyer held his own press conference, announcing that Kelvin would be cooperating with federal prosecutors and providing evidence against Frank in exchange for a plea deal. "My client was manipulated and coerced by his older brother," the lawyer declared. Frank Proctor used Mr. Kelvin Proctor's financial desperation and family loyalty to make him the face of these fraudulent schemes, while Frank himself remained hidden in the shadows. Frank's legal team immediately issued a statement denying everything, but the damage was done. Family turning on family. The media loved it. Evan's phone rang. "Special Agent Hatch. Did you send those documents to Kelvin Proctor's attorney?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Evan, I appreciate what you've done, but you can't interfere with an ongoing investigation. If you're sitting on evidence, you need to give it to us, not leak it to create chaos. Agent Hatch, with all respect, I gave you everything relevant to the criminal case. What Kelvin and Frank do to each other isn't my concern. I'm just a victim trying to rebuild his life." She sighed. "The assistant U.S. attorney wants to meet with you. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't play games, Evan. We're on your side, but you need to let us do our jobs." "I'll be there." After hanging up, Evan allowed himself a small smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd planned. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you're smart. You're not. We're going to make you pay." He traced the number. It came from a burner phone that had pinged off a cell tower near Frank's house. Frank, or one of his allies, trying to intimidate him. Evan saved the text and forwarded it to Agent Hatch. Then he went back to work. Tomorrow would be interesting. Chapter 7. The Testimony. The preliminary hearing was held in federal court, a granite building in downtown Chicago that represented everything Frank Proctor feared: justice, accountability, consequences. Evan sat in the gallery, watching as Frank was led in by U.S. Marshals. The old man looked diminished, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeat in his eyes. When he noticed Evan, his face twisted with rage. The hearing lasted 3 hours. The assistant U.S. attorney, a methodical woman named Ann Whitaker, presented evidence that was damning. Bank records, email chains, recorded conversations, testimony from Alfonso Hodges and Robbie Casey, and Evan's carefully documented timeline of the fraud. Frank's lawyer tried to argue that Evan had fabricated the evidence, but it fell flat. The FBI's forensic accountants had verified everything. When the judge denied bail, citing Frank as a flight risk given his offshore accounts, Frank erupted. "This is a setup. My son-in-law is the criminal. The judge banged her gavel. "Mr. Proctor, control yourself or I'll have you removed." Evan watched, feeling a cold satisfaction. Frank had taught him something important. In business, the person who controls the narrative controls the outcome. Evan had seized that narrative and rewritten it entirely. After the hearing, Evan met with Ann Whitaker in her office. "We're going to need you to testify at trial," she said. "You're our star witness. Without you, we don't have a case this solid. I'll testify, but I need something in return. We don't make deals with witnesses. Not a legal deal. Information." I need to know about Kathy, my wife. How involved was she? And hesitated. I can't discuss ongoing aspects of the investigation. She was in on it, wasn't she? She helped her father plan my firing. Evan, I can't confirm or deny. Fine. Then let me tell you what I know, and you can tell me if I need a lawyer for her too. He laid out what Leah Manning had told him, plus additional evidence he'd found. Email exchanges between Kathy and Frank discussing the Evan problem. Text messages between Kathy and Kelvin about how to manage the transition. En's expression grew grim. Mr. Levine, your wife is currently a person of interest in the investigation. We're determining the extent of her knowledge and involvement. If she knowingly participated in the fraud, she could face charges. Evan felt his stomach drop. Part of him wanted justice. Kathy had betrayed him. But another part of him thought about James, about his son growing up with both parents in prison. If she cooperates, if she testifies against Frank, would that help her case? Potentially. But that's her decision to make with her attorney. Evan left the federal building and drove to a park near his old house. He sat on a bench, watching families play, children laughing. His phone rang. Kathy, we need to talk, she said, her voice strained. About what? About everything. Can you meet me? Please. They met at a coffee shop they'd gone to on their first date a lifetime ago. Kathy looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Her hand rested on her pregnant belly. My lawyer says I'm going to be indicted, she said without preamble. For conspiracy. For fraud. They're saying I was part of Dad's scheme. Were you? I didn't know about the pension fund, Evan. I swear, I didn't know he was stealing from employees. I just thought. She trailed off. You thought what? I thought he was protecting what was his. When Dad told me you were getting too powerful, that you were trying to take over the company, I believed him. I helped him plan to push you out because I thought we were protecting our family's business. Our family's business? Kathy, I built that company. I saved it from bankruptcy. And you helped your father destroy me because he convinced you I was the threat. I was wrong. Tears streamed down her face. I know I was wrong. But Evan, our child, she touched her stomach. If I go to prison, what happens to our children? You should have thought about that before you betrayed me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, Evan, you have to help me. I'll testify against Dad. I'll tell them everything I know. Just please help me avoid prison. Think about James. Think about our baby. Evan looked at his wife, at the woman he'd loved, and felt nothing but emptiness. I'll talk to the U.S. attorney. I'll tell them you cooperated with me, that you provided information. But Kathy, we're done. The marriage is over. I know. She wiped her tears. I know. I just need to protect our children. They're all I care about, too. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Kathy's cooperation opened new fronts in the investigation. She provided emails and text messages that showed Frank had been planning the fraud for years, long before Evan had joined the company. Frank's goal had always been to build the company's value, engineer a massive sale, then disappear with the proceeds while leaving others to deal with the aftermath. Evan had been both his greatest asset and his greatest threat. Evan's innovations had made Frank wealthy beyond his dreams, but Evan's ethics and attention to detail meant he couldn't be trusted with the final phase of the plan. Frank's solution: push Evan out, blame him for any fraud that was discovered, and ride off into the sunset with millions. It would have worked, too, if Evan hadn't been documenting everything. The trial began in September. Federal prosecutors brought charge after charge: securities fraud, wire fraud, theft from employee pension funds, money laundering, tax evasion. The evidence was overwhelming. Evan testified for 3 days. He walked the jury through his documentation, explained the technical aspects of the fraud, and remained calm under aggressive cross-examination from Frank's attorneys. Mr. Levine, Frank's lawyer said, his voice dripping with skepticism, isn't it true that you had full access to all the financial systems you claim your father-in-law manipulated? Yes. And isn't it true that you were the chief operating officer, responsible for day-to-day operations? Yes. So how do we know you weren't the one committing fraud, and you're simply trying to frame Mr. Proctor? Evan pulled out a tablet. Because I have time-stamped security footage of Frank and Kelvin in Frank's office at 11:47 p.m. on August 14th, 2024, discussing how to hide the pension fund transfers. I have recordings of their conversations detailing the shell companies. I have emails between Frank and offshore banks that I never had access to. And most importantly, I reported the fraud to authorities. Why would I do that if I were guilty? The lawyer had no response. Kelvin testified next, having accepted a plea deal. He confirmed everything, admitting that Frank had manipulated him, used his gambling debts as leverage, and set him up to take the fall. My brother told me Evan was trying to steal the company, Kelvin said, his voice bitter. He said if we didn't act first, Evan would push us both out. I believe him because he's my brother. I trusted him, and he betrayed me. The jury took 4 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Frank Proctor was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The judge was particularly harsh, noting that Frank had betrayed the trust of employees who dedicated their careers to building his company, only to have their retirement funds stolen. Kelvin received 8 years for his cooperation. Kathy avoided prison entirely, receiving 5 years probation for her testimony and her limited role in the conspiracy. She was essentially collateral damage, a daughter manipulated by her father. Proctor Manufacturing filed for bankruptcy shortly after the verdict. The company's reputation was destroyed, its finances in shambles. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs. But there was one more surprise. Chapter 9. The Resurrection. 6 months after the trial, Evan stood in a conference room in a newly renovated office building in Schaumburg, a Chicago suburb. Around the table sat Alfonso Hodges, Robbie Casey, Leah Manning, and a dozen of the best engineers and managers who'd worked at Proctor Manufacturing. Thank you all for coming, Evan said. I know the past year has been difficult. We all lost something when Proctor Manufacturing collapsed. But we also learned something important. We weren't working for Frank. We were working for each other. We built something extraordinary as a team. He pulled up a presentation on the screen. I'd like to introduce you to Levine Technologies, a new company built on the patents and innovations that I personally developed at Proctor Manufacturing, patents that I legally own, as confirmed by the bankruptcy court. During the bankruptcy proceedings, Evan had made a strategic move. He'd filed claims for his patents, arguing that they were his intellectual property, created by him, merely licensed to Proctor Manufacturing. His lawyers had proven that Frank had never properly documented ownership transfer of Evan's innovations. The bankruptcy judge had agreed. Evan's patents, worth tens of millions, were his to keep. But this isn't just my company, Evan continued. Everyone in this room is getting equity. We're going to build something better than Proctor Manufacturing. We're going to do it right this time, with transparency, integrity, and profit sharing for every employee. Alfonso Hodges smiled. I'm in. Me too, said Robbie Casey. Leah Manning nodded. Someone has to keep you organized. Over the next hour, they discussed strategy. Evan had already secured initial funding from an ethical venture capital firm that specialized in supporting whistleblowers who wanted to rebuild. Several of Proctor Manufacturing's former clients had reached out, eager to work with Evan despite, or perhaps because of everything that had happened. You proved you had integrity, one client had told him. That's rare. We want to do business with someone we could trust. As the meeting wrapped up, Evan's phone buzzed. A text from Kathy. Can I bring James by this weekend? He misses you. Evan had been seeing his son regularly. The custody arrangement had been formalized, joint custody, with Evan getting James every other week. It wasn't ideal, but it was working. James was adjusting, and Evan had made his son his priority. Kathy and Evan weren't friends, exactly, but they'd achieved a civil coexistence for James's sake. She'd given birth to a daughter, Evan's daughter, 3 months ago, a little girl named Abby. Evan was building a relationship with her too, one bottle feeding at a time. The divorce would be finalized next month. Evan had ensured Kathy got the house and a fair settlement. He didn't want to punish her for her mistakes. He wanted to move forward. That evening, Evan drove to his new condo overlooking Lake Michigan. It was smaller than the Winnetka house, but it was his. A fresh start. His phone rang. Jonathan, his father. How'd the meeting go? Great. We're really doing this, Dad. Building a new company. I'm proud of you, son. You handled everything with integrity. That takes courage. I learned from the best. They talked for a while, and after hanging up, Evan stepped onto his balcony. Chicago spread out before him, lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere in that city, Frank Proctor was in a federal prison, his empire in ruins. Kelvin was there too, probably cursing the day he conspired with his brother. Evan felt no triumph, no joy in their downfall. Just a quiet sense that justice had been served. He'd been betrayed by family, nearly destroyed by false accusations, and forced to burn down everything he'd built to expose the truth. But he'd survived. More than that, he'd rebuilt. Not just a company, but his life. His relationship with his children. His sense of self. Frank had tried to paint him as the villain. History would remember differently. Evan pulled out his phone and opened a photo of James and Abby. His kids. His future. He'd fought for them. For truth. For justice. And he'd won. Not because he was ruthless or willing to compromise his principles, but because he'd refused to back down when others tried to corrupt him. Because he'd documented the truth meticulously and had the courage to expose it, no matter the personal cost. Frank had taught him an important lesson. Family isn't about blood. It's about trust, loyalty, and shared values. Frank had failed that test. Evan had passed it. As he looked out at the city, Evan smiled. Tomorrow he'd start building Levine Technologies. Next week, he'd have James for his custody week. Next month, the divorce will be final. His life was moving forward. And this time, he was in control. The end. Epilogue. 3 years later, Levine Technologies was valued at $180 million. The company specialized in smart industrial systems, building on Evan's original innovations, but taking them further. They'd won contracts with major manufacturers and were expanding internationally. Evan had remarried, not to someone from the corporate world, but to a teacher named and he'd met at James's school. They'd bonded over their shared commitment to integrity and family. James was 7 now, thriving in 2nd grade. Abby was 3, a force of nature with Kathy's determination and Evan's curiosity. Frank Proctor was still in prison, with 12 years left on his sentence. Kelvin had been released after serving 5 years, but struggled to find work. He'd reached out to Evan once, asking for a job. Evan had politely declined. Kathy had rebuilt her life too, working as a consultant and staying sober after addressing the anxiety and depression that had made her vulnerable to Frank's manipulation. She and Evan had achieved something rare, a functional co-parenting relationship based on mutual respect, if not affection. And Evan, he stood in his office at Levine Technologies, looking at a patent certificate that had just arrived. Another innovation, another building block for the future. His phone buzzed. James, calling from Kathy's house. Dad, I got an A on my science project. That's amazing, buddy. Tell me all about it. As James excitedly described his project about solar panels, Evan smiled. This was success. Not the corner office or the millions in valuation. This, family, integrity, building something meaningful. Frank had tried to teach him that the only thing that mattered was winning at any cost. Evan had proven him wrong. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Roman Reynolds had always been a light sleeper. 20 years in military intelligence had trained him to wake at the slightest disturbance, a habit that had served him well in the corporate world and now, at 45, in his seemingly peaceful suburban life. But the shrill ring of Thelma's phone at 3 a.m. wasn't just any disturbance. It was the sound that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his marriage. Roman lay motionless in their king-sized bed, watching through half-closed eyes as his wife of 18 years fumbled for her phone in the darkness. Her hands trembled as she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought we agreed you'd never call here," she said, her tone carrying a mixture of fear and anger that Roman had never heard before. He controlled his breathing, maintaining the steady rhythm of sleep while every muscle in his body tensed. In the darkness, he could see Thelma's silhouette rigid against the faint light filtering through their bedroom window. Whoever was on the other end was speaking in urgent, hushed tones that Roman couldn't quite make out, but he caught fragments, something about the plan and tonight. Then Thelma gasped, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the silence like a blade. "He won't be a problem. I'll make sure," she whispered into the phone, her voice now cold and determined in a way that made Roman's blood run cold. She turned slightly, and Roman felt her gaze on him. He maintained his facade of sleep, years of training keeping his breathing steady even as his mind raced. After what felt like an eternity, Thelma slipped out of bed and padded silently toward the bathroom, still clutching her phone. Roman's mind immediately shifted into tactical mode. 18 years of marriage, and he'd never seen this side of his wife. Thelma, the woman who organized charity galas and baked cookies for their daughter's school events, had just spoken with the cold efficiency of someone planning something sinister. The phrase, "he won't be a problem," echoed in his mind, and Roman was certain the he in question was him. Before he could process this revelation further, the soft patter of bare feet on hardwood announced another presence. Their 16-year-old daughter, Lindsay, appeared in the doorway, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "Dad," she whispered urgently, glancing toward the bathroom, where they could hear Thelma's muffled voice continuing the conversation. "You need to hide now." The words hit Roman like a physical blow. His own daughter was warning him of danger from her mother. This wasn't just about an affair. This was something far more serious. "Lindsay, He began to whisper, but she shook her head frantically. "There's no time. They're coming. Mom, she's not who you think she is. She's been planning this for months." Tears streamed down Lindsay's face as she spoke. "I overheard her talking to Uncle Jerome last week. They're going to—" The bathroom door opened, cutting her off. Lindsay quickly melted back into the shadows of the hallway as Thelma emerged, now fully dressed in dark clothing. In her hand was something that made Roman's blood freeze. His service pistol from the safe, he thought only he knew the combination to. Thelma moved with practiced silence toward the bed, and Roman realized with crystal clarity that his wife of 18 years was planning to kill him in his sleep. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to fight, to survive, but Roman forced himself to remain still. He needed to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. As Thelma approached the bed, Roman caught sight of her face in the dim light. Gone was any trace of the woman he'd married, replaced by someone cold and calculating. She raised the pistol with steady hands, and Roman knew that whatever came next, his old life was over. The Roman Reynolds who had trusted, who had loved without question, who had believed in the sanctity of his family, that man died in that moment. What remained was the predator he'd once been, the man who had earned his reputation in the darkest corners of military intelligence as someone you never crossed twice. Because Roman Reynolds never forgave, and he never forgot. Chapter 2. The Hunter Awakens. Roman's survival instincts kicked in with lethal precision. As Thelma raised the pistol, he rolled hard to the left, off the bed and onto the floor just as the muzzle flash lit up the room. The shot was silenced. She'd even thought to modify his own weapon. The bullet punched in a mattress where his head had been moments before. In one fluid motion, Roman swept Thelma's legs, sending her crashing to the floor. The pistol skittered across the hardwood as he pinned her down with minimal effort, his hand across her throat. "Who the hell are you?" he growled, his voice carrying the edge of a man who had interrogated enemies in places that didn't officially exist. Thelma's mask finally slipped completely, her face twisting into something ugly and unfamiliar. "You always were too smart for your own good, Roman. Jerome said you'd figure out eventually." "Jerome Massey," Roman said, the pieces clicking into place. Thelma's brother, the one who'd been so helpful when Roman left military service, who'd helped them relocate to this quiet suburb, who'd been a constant presence in their lives. "How long?" 3 years, she spat. 3 years of playing the loving wife to a man who never even suspected that his perfect little family was nothing but an operation. Roman's mind raced back through the timeline. 3 years ago, he'd been recruited by Meridian Securities, a private defense contractor, after his military discharge. The recruitment had come through Jerome's recommendation. Jerome, who'd claimed to have connections in the private sector. Jerome, who'd been Thelma's brother since birth, but whom Roman had never bothered to thoroughly investigate. "What's the endgame?" Roman asked, increasing pressure on her throat. Thelma smiled, even as she gasped for air. "Your security clearance, your access codes, your biometric data. You're worth 50 million to the right people, Roman. Dead, you're worth nothing but a life insurance payout." Roman heard movement downstairs. Multiple sets of footsteps trying to be quiet, but failing against someone with his training. They'd planned this as a home invasion gone wrong, probably with Roman as the heroic father who died defending his family. He released Thelma and moved to the window, peering through the blinds. 3 vehicles parked strategically around the house, engines running, occupants moving into position. Professional, but not military professional. Private contractors, probably ex-military themselves, but lacking the discipline that came with elite training. "Dad!" Lindsay's voice came from the hallway, tight with fear. "Stay where you are, sweetheart," Roman called back, his voice calm despite the situation. To Thelma, who was trying to crawl toward the pistol, he said, "How much of it was real? Any of it? Does it matter?" She wheezed. Roman retrieved his pistol and checked the magazine. 3 rounds missing. She'd been practicing. "Lindsay is real," he said, more to himself than to her. "She warned me. Lindsay doesn't know what's good for her," Thelma snarled. She was supposed to stay out of this. That was when Roman understood the full scope of the betrayal. Not only had his wife been living a lie for 3 years, but she'd been willing to sacrifice their daughter's well-being, possibly her life, for whatever this operation was designed to accomplish. Roman had killed men for less. He zip-tied Thelma's hands behind her back with restraints he kept in his nightstand, old habits from his intelligence days, and secured her to the radiator. "You're going to tell me everything. Names, timelines, objectives, extraction plans. Everything. Go to hell," she spat. Roman smiled, and it was the smile that had made enemy combatants talk when traditional interrogation methods had failed. "Thelma, you've forgotten something important about my former profession. I didn't just gather intelligence, I extracted it. And I was very, very good at my job." He heard the soft sound of the front door being breached downstairs, followed by the careful footsteps of men trying to move silently through his house. Roman counted at least 4, possibly 6 intruders. Moving to his closet, Roman opened a hidden panel that revealed his war chest, weapons, ammunition, tactical gear, and communication equipment that Thelma had never known existed. As he strapped on body armor and loaded his preferred rifle, he felt the familiar cold calm that had made him one of the military's most effective operators. "This is what you never understood about me," he said to Thelma as he prepared for battle. "I wasn't just a soldier or an intelligence officer. I was the man they sent when everyone else had failed. I was the final solution." Roman checked his weapons one more time and moved toward the bedroom door. The men downstairs thought they were hunting a soft suburban husband. They were about to discover they'd walked into the den of an apex predator. "Lindsay," he called softly into the hallway. "Go to the panic room. Now." As his daughter's footsteps faded toward the hidden safe room he'd installed when they'd moved to the house, Roman allowed himself one last look at the woman he'd thought was his wife. "When this is over," he told her, "you're going to wish you'd aimed better." Chapter 3. First Blood. Roman moved through his own house like a ghost, every creaking floorboard and shadow mapped in his memory. The intruders were good, but they were operating in his territory now, and Roman had spent years learning to hunt humans in urban environments. He could hear them moving through the first floor, 2 in the kitchen, 1 near the front door, and at least 2 more in the living room. They were spreading out, probably planning to sweep upstairs in a coordinated assault. It was a sound tactical approach against a normal target. Roman wasn't normal. He slipped into Lindsay's room and opened her window, which led to the roof of the garage. From there, he could access the maple tree that he'd climbed dozens of times during weekend maintenance. Within minutes, he was on the ground outside, moving in a wide circle to approach the house from an unexpected angle. The surveillance team and the vehicles hadn't expected him to leave the house. Roman took out the driver of the first SUV with a sleeper hold, appropriated his radio, and listened to the tactical chatter. Alpha Team, status report. The voice was professional, military. Kitchen clear, moving to stairs. Copy that. Bravo Team, maintain perimeter. Negative contact on target. Wife confirmed secure upstairs. Roman smiled grimly. They still thought they were hunting an unsuspecting civilian. Time to change the dynamic. He slipped through the back door using a key hidden in a fake sprinkler head, another security measure Thelma had never known about. The first intruder in the kitchen never saw him coming. Roman's knife found the spot between the third and fourth ribs, angled upward to the heart. The man dropped silently. The second kitchen operative turned at the soft sound of his partner's fall and found Roman's pistol pressed against his forehead. How many? Roman whispered. 6 total, plus support. The man gasped, recognizing death in Roman's eyes. Extraction plan? Helicopter pickup at the elementary school. 10 minutes. Roman zip-tied him and moved toward the living room. Through the doorway, he could see 2 men positioned near the stairs, assault rifles ready. Professional positioning, good sight lines, discipline, trigger control. Ex-military, definitely, but not elite tier. Roman triggered the house's security system from his phone, plunging the first floor into darkness and activating the infrared strobes that would disorient anyone wearing night vision. In the chaos that followed, he moved like a predator among prey. The first man went down with a broken neck before he could call out. The second managed to get off a shot that went wide before Roman's blade found his throat. The man by the front door tried to radio for backup, but found Roman behind him. The radio crushed and its owner unconscious. Alpha Team, respond. The voice on the radio was getting urgent. Roman keyed the mic and spoke in the accent he'd perfected during operations in Eastern Europe. Alpha Team is compromised. Target is not in the house. Repeat, target is not in the house. Say again, Alpha. Target has fled. We need immediate extraction. Abort mission. There was a pause, then negative. Mission continues. Find the target. Roman smiled. Jerome wasn't going to let his people retreat, which meant Roman could pick them off one by one without worrying about reinforcements. The remaining 2 operators upstairs were now isolated and facing an enemy they'd underestimated. He climbed the back stairs, the ones Thelma didn't know about that led to the hidden passage between the walls, a Cold War-era addition by the home's original owner that Roman had discovered and enhanced. From inside the walls, he could hear the 2 remaining intruders searching the bedrooms. Where the hell is he? One of them muttered. Check the daughter's room again. Maybe he's hiding with her. That decided their fate. Roman had been willing to let them live if they surrendered, but threatening Lindsay crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He emerged from the wall panel behind the first operator and killed him quickly and quietly. The second one turned at the sound and found himself facing Roman across the upstairs hallway. You're Roman Reynolds? The man said, lowering his weapon slightly. We heard stories about you in Afghanistan. The ghost of Kandahar. You heard correctly, Roman replied, which means you know what happens next. The man nodded slowly and placed his weapon on the floor. I have a family. So did I, Roman said and pulled the trigger. As the gunshot echoed through the house, Roman felt the familiar cold satisfaction that came with eliminating threats. But this was just the beginning. Jerome Massey had sent these men, which meant Jerome knew where Roman lived, knew his routines, knew his family. That was unacceptable. Roman returned to his bedroom, where Thelma was exactly where he'd left her, though her eyes were wide with shock at the sounds of combat from downstairs. 6 men, Roman said conversationally as he began cleaning his weapons. All dead. Your brother's going to be disappointed. You're insane, she whispered. No, Roman replied. I'm thorough. Now, you're going to tell me everything about Jerome's operation. Who he's working for, what they want with my clearance codes, where they're based, and how many more people are involved. I won't tell you anything. Roman finished cleaning his pistol and looked at her with the same expression he'd worn when interrogating Taliban commanders. Thelma, you've made 2 critical errors tonight. First, You underestimated who I am. Second, you threatened my daughter. He moved closer, and she could see something in his eyes that made her press back against the radiator. I've spent 20 years perfecting the art of extracting information from people who didn't want to give it. Some of them were trained to resist torture. Some of them were fanatics who welcomed death over betrayal. None of them held out forever. Roman knelt down, so they were eye level. You're not a fanatic, Thelma. You're just a woman who got in over her head and chose the wrong side. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything I want to know, and in exchange, I might let you live long enough to spend the rest of your life in federal prison instead of dying very slowly in this bedroom. And if I don't, Roman's smile was cold as winter. Then I'll start with your fingers and work my way up. I have all night, and Jerome doesn't expect his team to check in until dawn. Thelma stared at him for a long moment, seeing clearly for the first time the man she tried to manipulate and betray. The suburban husband was gone, replaced by something that belonged in the shadows of foreign wars. She began to talk. Chapter 4. The Web Unravels. As dawn broke over the suburban neighborhood, Roman sat in his home office reviewing the intelligence Thelma had provided. The scope of the operation was larger than he'd initially suspected, and far more personal. Jerome Massey wasn't just Thelma's brother. He was a high-level operative for a consortium of foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations that specialized in recruiting long-term assets within the American defense establishment. The operation against Roman had been 3 years in the planning, beginning with Jerome's insertion into their lives after Roman's discharge from military service. But the most shocking revelation was about Lindsay. According to Thelma, their daughter wasn't his biological child. She was Jerome's daughter, placed with Thelma when Roman and Thelma were dating as part of a long-term infiltration plan. Lindsay had been raised to eventually become an asset herself. Roman's hands tightened on the intelligence report as he processed this information. For 16 years, he'd loved and protected a child who was genetically programmed to betray him. Yet Lindsay had warned him, had risked her own safety to save his life. A soft knock on the office door interrupted his thoughts. "Dad." Lindsay's voice was tentative, uncertain. "Come in, sweetheart." Lindsay entered the office, her eyes red from crying and her face pale with exhaustion. She'd spent the night in the panic room while Roman dealt with the cleanup. 6 bodies removed, blood cleaned, evidence sanitized. The efficiency of it spoke to years of experience in making problems disappear. "Is she?" Lindsay couldn't finish the question. "Your mother is alive," Roman said carefully. "She's in federal custody now." "She's not my mother," Lindsay said quietly. "I heard what she told you about my real father." About Jerome. Roman studied his daughter, the child he'd raised, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, protected from nightmares. Genetically, she might be Jerome Massey's offspring, but she was his daughter in every way that mattered. DNA doesn't make a family, Lindsay. Love does. Loyalty does. Choice does. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You chose to warn me last night. You chose to save my life. That makes you my daughter, regardless of what any test might say." Tears streamed down Lindsay's face. "I've known for 2 years. I overheard Mom and Uncle Jerome talking about the asset and realized they meant me. They wanted me to seduce information out of you, to become your confidant, so I could access your security protocols. But you didn't. How could I? You're my dad. You taught me right from wrong. You showed me what real love looks like." She wiped her eyes. "When I realized what they were planning, I started documenting everything. I have recordings, photographs, evidence of their meetings." Roman felt a surge of pride, mixed with concern. His 16-year-old daughter had been conducting a counterintelligence operation against her own mother and biological father. The training he'd given her, self-defense, situational awareness, critical thinking, had turned her into exactly the kind of person who could recognize and resist manipulation. "Show me," he said. For the next hour, Lindsay presented a comprehensive dossier that would have impressed professional intelligence analysts. She documented Jerome's visits, recorded conversations when possible, and even managed to photograph documents left carelessly around the house. The picture that emerged was of a sophisticated network that had been using their family as a base of operations for years. "There's something else," Lindsay said hesitantly. Jerome has other families, other operations like this one. He showed me photographs once, said they were success stories of assets who'd chosen the right side. Roman's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about him. It was about a systematic program of infiltration and recruitment targeting American intelligence personnel. How many other families were living lies? How many other children were being groomed as future assets? Did you recognize any of the families in the photographs? Some of them. Remember the Dawsons from my old school? And the Warners from the country club? Lindsay pulled out her phone and showed Roman screenshots she'd taken. These are all families of people with security clearances. Jerome has been building a network for years. Roman studied the images, his military mind automatically cataloging targets and threats. Richard Dawson worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Christopher Warner was a contractor with Lockheed Martin. There were at least a dozen families in the photographs, all with children Lindsay's age or younger. We need to expose this, Lindsay said. We need to save those families. Roman was quiet for a long moment, considering options. The traditional approach would be to contact the FBI, turn over the evidence, and let the justice system handle it. But Roman had learned long ago that the justice system had limitations, especially when dealing with foreign intelligence operations. Courts required proof beyond reasonable doubt. International law enforcement was slow and bureaucratic. Diplomatic considerations often took precedence over justice. And most importantly, traditional justice wouldn't account for the personal betrayal he'd suffered or the danger his daughter had been placed in. There's another way, Roman said finally. We can end this operation permanently and send a message that will prevent anyone from trying something similar. What kind of message? Roman looked at his daughter, the girl who'd risked everything to save him, who'd conducted her own investigation to protect the country she loved, who'd chosen loyalty over blood. She deserved to know what kind of man her father really was. The kind that requires eliminating Jerome Massey and everyone associated with his network, Roman said simply. The kind that makes it clear that certain lines should never be crossed. Lindsay was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked, "What do you need me to do?" Roman smiled, recognizing himself in her unflinching acceptance of what needed to be done. "First, we're going to make Jerome think his operation succeeded. Then we're going to use his own network against him." He pulled up a map on his computer, marking locations from Lindsay's evidence. "Jerome thinks I'm dead and that Thelma completed her mission. He'll want to debrief her and collect the intelligence she was supposed to gather. That gives us a narrow window to get close to him." "It's a trap," Lindsay said, understanding immediately. "The best kind," Roman agreed. "The kind where the prey thinks it's the predator." As they began planning, Roman felt the familiar cold focus that had made him so effective in military operations. But this time, it wasn't about national security or military objectives. This was personal. This was about family, the real kind, built on love and choice rather than genetics and manipulation. Jerome Massey had made the mistake of threatening the people Roman loved most. Now he was going to learn why Roman Reynolds never forgave and never forgot. Chapter 5, The Bait. Roman's plan required precision timing and a convincing performance from someone Jerome would never suspect, Lindsay herself. 3 days after the failed assassination attempt, Roman put the plan into motion. Lindsay sat in a coffee shop near Georgetown University, the same one where she'd met Jerome for uncle-niece bonding sessions over the past 2 years. To any observer, she looked like a traumatized teenager seeking comfort from a family member after her father's sudden death. Jerome Massey arrived exactly on time, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of bearing that suggested military service. To the casual observer, he looked like exactly what he claimed to be, a successful businessman who doted on his sister's family. "Lindsay," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I came as soon as I heard. I'm so sorry about your father." Lindsay allowed tears to well up in her eyes. Not difficult, given the circumstances. "It happened so fast, Uncle Jerome. The police said it was a home invasion, but..." She let her voice trail off. The picture of a confused and frightened girl. But what, sweetheart? Mom's been acting strange since it happened. She keeps talking about leaving town, starting over somewhere new. She's been making phone calls at all hours, speaking in languages I don't recognize. Lindsay leaned forward, lowering her voice. I found Dad's gun in her purse yesterday. Why would she have his gun? Jerome's expression didn't change, but Roman, watching from a table across the cafe through a directional microphone and camera hidden in Lindsay's backpack, caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Jerome was processing this information, trying to determine if Thelma had broken protocol or if this was genuine confusion from a grieving daughter. Your mother is probably just scared, Jerome said carefully. Sometimes people do strange things when they're processing grief. Uncle Jerome, Lindsay said, her voice taking on the tone of desperate trust that teenagers used when seeking adult guidance. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, sweetheart. Anything. Was Dad involved in something dangerous? Something that might have gotten him killed? Jerome was quiet for a moment, and Roman could see the calculation in his eyes. This was the moment where Jerome would decide whether Lindsay was a potential asset or a liability. Why do you ask that? Jerome said finally. Because I found things in his office. Hidden things. Lindsay pulled out a folder, one that Roman had carefully prepared with authentic-looking but ultimately harmless intelligence documents. These were in a secret compartment behind his bookshelf. I don't understand what they are, but they look official. Jerome took the folder and examined its contents, his professional mask slipping slightly as he recognized the format and classification markings of genuine intelligence documents. The papers were authentic. Roman had access to plenty of declassified materials, but carefully selected to suggest ongoing operations without revealing anything truly sensitive. Where exactly did you find these? Jerome asked, his tone shifting subtly from concerned uncle to something more interrogative. In a hidden panel. There were other things too, cash, passports with Dad's picture, but different names, some kind of electronic equipment. Lindsay was describing the contents of Roman's actual emergency cache, but one that he'd already evacuated and relocated. Uncle Jerome, was my dad a spy? Jerome studied her face carefully, looking for signs of deception. Lindsay met his gaze with a perfect mixture of fear, confusion, and desperate need for answers that any genuinely traumatized teenager would display. Your father worked for the government in various capacities, Jerome said slowly. Some of his work was classified, which is probably what you found. But Lindsay, this is exactly the kind of thing that could be dangerous if the wrong people knew about it. What do you mean? I mean that if your father was targeted because of his work, then you and your mother could be in danger too. Especially if there are people who think you have access to sensitive information. Lindsay's eyes widened in perfectly calculated fear. What should I do? Jerome leaned back, and Roman could see the moment when Jerome made his decision. The girl was clearly unaware of her true parentage or the real nature of the operation. She was frightened, alone, and sitting on potentially valuable intelligence. Most importantly, she trusted Jerome implicitly. First, you can't tell anyone else about what you found. Not the police, not your friends, not anyone. Jerome's voice carried a note of urgency. Second, I think you and your mother should come stay with me for a while, just until we can figure out what's safe. Would you help me go through Dad's things? Maybe figure out what's important and what isn't. Lindsay's voice carried exactly the right note of desperate gratitude. I don't know who else to trust. Of course, sweetheart. We're family. Jerome reached across and patted her hand. Why don't you bring your mother and come to my house this weekend? We can sort through everything together and make sure you're both safe. As they made arrangements for the weekend visit, Roman allowed himself a moment of cold satisfaction. Jerome had taken the bait completely. He thought he was recruiting a traumatized asset and gaining access to potentially valuable intelligence materials. Instead, he was inviting Roman Reynolds directly into his center of operations. After Jerome left, Lindsay walked to the restroom and used a prearranged signal to confirm the meeting had gone according to plan. Roman's response was equally subtle, a specific ringtone on her phone that confirmed Phase 2 could proceed. That evening, Roman and Lindsay reviewed the intelligence they'd gathered from the cafe meeting. The directional microphone had picked up not just Jerome's conversation with Lindsay, but also a phone call he'd made immediately after leaving the cafe. The package is secured, Jerome had said in what Roman recognized as coded language. The secondary asset is cooperative and uninformed. Extraction this weekend for full debrief and assessment. Roman translated for Lindsay. He thinks he's collecting you and your mother for interrogation and recruitment. He's planning to extract whatever intelligence he thinks we have, then either recruit you into his network or eliminate you as a security risk. And instead, Lindsay asked, instead, he's going to discover that he's brought a predator directly into his den, Roman said grimly. Jerome Massey has spent 3 years believing he was manipulating me. This weekend, he's going to learn what it feels like to be hunted by someone who's very, very good at it. Roman pulled up architectural plans on his computer, Jerome's house, obtained through public records and satellite imagery. He thinks he's bringing 2 frightened women to safety. Instead, he's about to face the man who spent 20 years perfecting the art of killing people who threaten what he loves. As they finalized their preparations, Roman felt the familiar calm that preceded a mission. Jerome Massey had made this personal when he'd targeted Roman's family. Now Roman was going to show him exactly why that had been a fatal mistake. Chapter 6. Into the Lion's Den. Jerome Massey's estate sat on 15 acres of wooded land in rural Virginia, far enough from civilization to ensure privacy, but close enough to major transportation hubs for operational flexibility. Roman had spent the week conducting surveillance, mapping security systems, and identifying escape routes. The property was well defended, but not impregnable. Jerome was confident in his operational security, but not paranoid enough to account for an enemy of Roman's caliber. On Saturday morning, Roman and Lindsay arrived at the estate in separate vehicles. Roman posed as a grieving widow's brother, complete with falsified documents and a carefully constructed backstory that would satisfy casual scrutiny. Lindsay rode with the woman who was supposed to be Thelma, actually Sarah Chun, a former military intelligence colleague who owed Roman several favors and specialized in deep cover operations. Jerome met them at the front door, playing the role of concerned family member to perfection. "I'm so glad you decided to come," he said, embracing the fake Thelma warmly. "You look terrible, Thel. This whole situation has been such a nightmare." Sarah Chun was good at her job. She portrayed a woman on the edge of breakdown, clinging to Jerome like a lifeline while maintaining the subtle tells that suggested she was hiding something important. To Jerome, she would appear to be exactly what he expected, a co-conspirator trying to maintain cover while processing the trauma of murdering her husband. "I keep thinking someone's watching us," Sarah murmured, glancing around nervously. "What if Roman's people know what we did? What if they're coming for us?" "That's why you're here," Jerome assured her. "This place is completely secure. We can talk freely and figure out our next steps." Roman, playing the role of grieving brother-in-law, maintained appropriate emotional distance while carefully cataloging the security measures he observed. Cameras at strategic points, motion sensors along the perimeter, and what appeared to be at least 2 armed guards positioned discreetly around the property. Professional setup, but Roman had penetrated far more sophisticated defenses. Jerome led them into a comfortable sitting room where he'd prepared refreshments and tissues, the props of someone expecting to comfort grieving family members. But Roman noticed the subtle details that revealed the room's true purpose. The chairs were positioned to prevent easy access to the doors. There were no potential weapons within reach, and the acoustics were wrong in a way that suggested electronic monitoring. "First, I want you both to know that you're safe here," Jerome began, settling into a chair that gave him clear sight lines to all entrances. "But I need to understand exactly what happened that night. The official police report says Roman was killed during a home invasion, but I'm concerned there might be more to it." Sarah, playing Thelma, broke down into convincing sobs. "It was supposed to be simple. Wait until he was asleep, make it look like an accident, then call for help. But he woke up somehow. He fought back. And the team I sent to assist you? All dead," Sarah said between sobs. "Roman killed them all. I've never seen anything like it. He wasn't the man I married, Jerome. He was something else. Something terrible. Jerome's expression darkened. 6 professional operators, and he killed them all? It was like he knew they were coming, Sarah continued. Like he was waiting for them. When it was over, he looked at me and said he knew about you, about the operation, about everything. Roman watched Jerome process this information, seeing the exact moment when suspicion began to override confidence. Jerome was beginning to realize that his carefully planned operation had encountered something unexpected. Did he say anything else? Jerome asked carefully. He said he was going to find you, Sarah whispered. He said he was going to make you pay for what you'd done to his family. But he's dead, Jerome said, though uncertainty was creeping into his voice. Is he? Sarah looked up, meeting Jerome's eyes directly. They never found his body, Jerome. The house burned down after I escaped. The police assumed he died in the fire, but what if? She was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from somewhere else in the house, followed immediately by the sharp crack of gunfire. Jerome's eyes widened as he reached for the pistol under his jacket, but Roman was already moving. The grieving brother-in-law disappeared, replaced by the operator who had earned his reputation in the darkest corners of foreign wars. Roman's knife found Jerome's wrist before the pistol cleared its holster, and his other hand closed around Jerome's throat with precisely the right pressure to disable without killing. "Hello, Jerome," Roman said quietly as chaos erupted around them. "We need to talk." Jerome's eyes bulged with shock and terror as he recognized the voice of the man he believed dead. "Impossible," he gasped. "You're dead. Thelma killed you." "Thelma is in federal custody," Roman said conversationally as gunfire continued to echo through the house. "The woman you've been talking to is a professional, and the sound you're hearing are my team eliminating your security personnel." "Your team?" Roman smiled coldly. "Did you really think I spent 20 years in military intelligence without making friends? Loyal friends. The kind who don't appreciate foreign operatives targeting American assets." Through the window, Jerome could see figures in tactical gear moving with professional precision around his property. Roman's team was actually a mix of active-duty special operations personnel and retired intelligence operatives, all of whom had personal reasons to object to foreign infiltration of American intelligence networks. "Now," Roman continued, "you're going to tell me about your entire operation. Every family you've infiltrated, every asset you've recruited, every handler you report to, and when you're done, you're going to help me dismantle the whole network." "I'll never." Roman increased pressure on Jerome's throat just enough to demonstrate that cooperation wasn't optional. "Jerome, you've made a fundamental error in judgment. You thought you were dealing with a soft target, a suburban husband who could be eliminated quietly. Instead, you've declared war on someone who spent 2 decades perfecting the art of making people and organizations disappear." As the gunfire outside died down and Roman's team secured the property, Jerome finally understood the scope of his miscalculation. He hadn't just failed to assassinate Roman Reynolds. He'd given Roman every justification he needed to destroy an entire intelligence network. "You have one chance to cooperate," Roman said quietly. "Take it." Jerome looked into Roman's eyes and saw his own death reflected there. Not immediate death, something far worse. The slow, methodical destruction of everything he'd built, everyone he cared about, every safe harbor he'd established over decades of careful planning. He began to talk. Chapter 7. The Network Falls. Jerome's confession took 6 hours and filled 43 pages of transcribed text. By the time he finished, Roman had the complete organizational structure of a foreign intelligence network that had been operating on American soil for over 15 years. The scope was staggering. 27 families infiltrated, including high-ranking personnel at the CIA, DIA, NSA, and major defense contractors. Sleeper agents planted as spouses, children, and trusted family friends. Assets recruited through blackmail, coercion, and long-term manipulation. A sophisticated support network that included safe houses, communication systems, and extraction protocols. 63 active assets, Roman said, reviewing the intelligence while Jerome sat restrained in the chair across from him. 14 handlers. 6 safe houses, 2 primary communication hubs. He looked up at Jerome. Impressive operation. Too bad you picked the wrong family to target. Jerome had progressed through the stages of defeat over the course of his interrogation. Denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a resigned acceptance that his life's work was about to be destroyed. What happens now, he asked. Now I give you a choice, Roman said. Option 1. I turn this intelligence over to the FBI, and you spend the rest of your life in federal prison while your network scatters to the wind. Some of them escape, some of them get arrested, and the damage to American security continues for years while the courts sort everything out. And option 2? Roman's smile was cold as winter. Option 2. You help me eliminate every single asset, handler, and support structure in your network. Permanently. Completely. No trials. No appeals. No chance for anyone to escape or rebuild. Jerome stared at him in horror. You're talking about murdering 63 people. I'm talking about eliminating foreign intelligence operatives who have infiltrated American security systems, Roman corrected. Some of them might survive if they surrender immediately and provide full cooperation. Others, he shrugged. Others chose their fate when they decided to betray their country. You can't just execute people without due process. Roman leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Jerome, let me explain something about due process. For 20 years, I operated in places where due process was a luxury we couldn't afford. When enemy combatants threatened American lives, we eliminated them. When foreign agents threatened American security, we neutralized them. The only difference between what I did overseas and what I'm planning to do here is geography. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the wooded landscape where his team had finished cleaning up Jerome's security personnel. You've been treating this like a game, Jerome. Moving pieces around a board, manipulating families, destroying lives for the sake of intelligence and money. But this isn't a game. This is war. And in war, there are only 2 outcomes, victory or death. Roman turned back to Jerome, and his expression was utterly implacable. I'm offering you the chance to end this war quickly and quietly, with minimal collateral damage. Help me clean up your network, and some of your people might survive. Refuse, and I'll hunt them down one by one, starting with the ones closest to you. What about Lindsay? Jerome asked desperately. She's my daughter. Lindsay is my daughter, Roman said firmly. She chose loyalty over blood. She chose to protect her family over advancing your operation. She's earned the right to be safe from the consequences of your choices. Jerome was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he asked, if I cooperate, what happens to me? You disappear, Roman said simply. New identity, relocated somewhere you can't cause any more damage. It's more mercy than you deserve, but Lindsay asked me to spare your life if possible. And if I don't cooperate, Roman's expression didn't change. Then you die slowly, after watching me destroy everyone you've ever worked with or cared about. I'll make sure you understand exactly how much damage your network caused before I finally put you out of your misery. Jerome closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decades of careful planning crashing down around him. He'd built something magnificent, a network that could have influenced American policy for generations. But he'd made one critical error. He'd underestimated Roman Reynolds. I'll need guarantees, Jerome said finally. Written assurances about protection for cooperative assets, relocation assistance, immunity from prosecution. You're not in a position to negotiate terms, Roman pointed out. Then you'll have to hunt down 63 people the hard way, Jerome said with a flash of his old confidence. Without my help, some of them will escape. Some of them will rebuild elsewhere. Your victory won't be complete. Roman considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. Limited immunity for assets who surrender voluntarily and provide full debriefings. Relocation assistance for those who cooperate completely. But handlers and support personnel are non-negotiable. They knew what they were doing. Agreed, Jerome said. Over the next 72 hours, Roman's expanded team, now including federal agents who specialized in counterintelligence operations, executed the most comprehensive roll-up of a foreign intelligence network in American history. Working from Jerome's detailed intelligence, they moved simultaneously against all 27 infiltrated families. Some of the operations went smoothly. Assets like Sarah Martinez, real name Katia Volkov, who had been posing as the wife of a Lockheed Martin engineer for 8 years, surrendered immediately when confronted with evidence of their activities. They were processed, debriefed, and relocated under new identities with the understanding that any future contact with foreign intelligence services would result in immediate termination. Other operations required more direct action. Handler Viktor Petrov, who had been coordinating West Coast operations from a safe house in Seattle, chose to fight rather than surrender. Roman personally led the team that eliminated him and his entire support cell. The official report would list it as a drug-related shooting, with no mention of foreign intelligence activities. The most challenging target was Dr. Elena Kozlov, who had spent 12 years posing as the wife of a CIA analyst while actually serving as a deep-cover intelligence officer for Russian foreign intelligence. When Roman's team moved on her safe house in McLean, Virginia, they discovered that she had anticipated exposure and prepared accordingly. Suicide vest, the team leader reported over comms. She's threatening to detonate if we don't withdraw. Roman, coordinating from the command vehicle, spoke directly to Elena through the team's communication system. Dr. Kozlov, this is Roman Reynolds. You have 30 seconds to surrender before I demonstrate why terrorist tactics don't work against someone with my background. You cannot stop us all. Elena replied in accented English. We are everywhere. We're your neighbors, your friends, your family. You cannot kill us all. Watch me, Roman said, and gave a signal. The sniper's bullet took Elena in the head before she could trigger the device, and the bomb disposal team secured the vest within minutes. As they processed the safe house, Roman felt the familiar cold satisfaction that came with eliminating a confirmed threat. By the end of the week, the network that Jerome had spent 15 years building was completely destroyed. 63 assets captured or eliminated. 14 handlers neutralized. 6 safe houses seized. 2 communication hubs dismantled. The damage to American security systems was being assessed and repaired by teams of cybersecurity specialists and counterintelligence analysts. It's over, Lindsay said as she reviewed the final reports with Roman in their hotel suite. They would be relocating soon. Their cover in the suburban neighborhood was blown, and they needed to disappear until the intelligence community finished processing the implications of the operation. This network is over, Roman corrected. There will be others. There always are. Will you hunt them too? Roman looked at his daughter, the girl who had chosen loyalty over blood, who had risked everything to protect her family, who had helped him destroy an intelligence network that threatened national security. She deserved honesty. If they threaten what I love, he said simply, yes. I will hunt them all. Chapter 8. Sins of the Father. 2 weeks after the network's destruction, Roman received a message that changed everything. Jerome had escaped federal custody. The details were sketchy, but the basic facts were clear. During transport to a secure facility for final processing, Jerome's vehicle had been ambushed by unknown attackers. 2 federal agents were dead, and Jerome had vanished without trace. Inside job, concluded FBI Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, the lead investigator on the case. Someone with access to transport schedules and routes. Professional operation, probably foreign intelligence using assets we haven't identified yet. Roman studied the crime scene photos in their temporary safe house, his expression growing darker with each image. This wasn't just an escape, it was a message. Jerome's handlers were telling Roman that the war wasn't over. Dad, Lindsay's voice carried a note of concern that had become familiar over the past weeks. What does this mean? It means Jerome lied to us, Roman said grimly. The network was larger than he admitted. There were people he didn't tell us about, support structures we didn't identify. And now, they have him back. Roman's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an untraceable number. You took our family. Now we'll take yours. Jerome sends his regards. The message included a photograph that made Roman's blood run cold. It showed their old house, the one they'd abandoned after the assassination attempt, but taken recently. Someone had been watching the property, studying it, learning their patterns even after they'd relocated. They know where we used to live, Roman said, showing Lindsay the message. They know our routines, our contacts, our escape routes. Jerome had more time to study us than we realized. So what do we do? Roman was quiet for a moment, considering options. The traditional approach would be to go deeper underground, disappear completely, and hope the intelligence agencies could eventually track down Jerome and his remaining handlers. But Roman had learned over the years that running from enemies only encouraged them to chase harder. We end this permanently, he said finally. Jerome wants to play games with my family? I'm going to show him what happens when he threatens the people I love. Roman's plan was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of hiding, he would use himself and Lindsay as bait to draw Jerome and his remaining handlers into a trap. But this time, the trap will be designed not just to capture them, but to eliminate any possibility of future retaliation. I'm not letting you use yourself as bait, Lindsay said when Roman explained the plan. And I'm definitely not going to be some helpless victim waiting to be rescued. Lindsay, no, Dad. I've been trained by the best, she said, referring to the combat and tactical training Roman had given her over the years. I can shoot, I can fight, and I can think tactically. If we're going to end this, we're going to do it together. Roman looked at his daughter, 17 years old now, but with the steady nerves and cold judgment of someone much older. The girl who had warned him about the assassination attempt had grown into a young woman who could handle herself in dangerous situations. Together, then, he agreed. But we do this my way, with my rules and my level of ruthlessness. The trap was elaborate and multi-layered, designed to account for every possible response Jerome and his handlers might attempt. Roman leaked information through carefully monitored channels, suggesting that he and Lindsay would be attending a memorial service for the federal agents killed during Jerome's escape. The service was real, but Roman's attendance was fiction, part of a deception designed to draw his enemies into a killing ground of his choosing. The actual bait was much more subtle. Roman arranged for Lindsay to be accidentally spotted at Georgetown University, apparently enrolling for early admission courses. To any surveillance team, it would appear that Roman was trying to give his daughter a normal life while maintaining minimal security protocols. Jerome took the bait exactly as Roman had predicted. The first attempt came on a Tuesday evening as Lindsay walked across campus after a lecture. 3 men in a stolen van tried to grab her in broad daylight, clearly expecting a quick snatch-and-grab operation against a teenage girl with minimal protection. They discovered their error when Lindsay drew the concealed pistol Roman had trained her to use and put 2 rounds center mass into the lead attacker before diving behind a concrete barrier. The other 2 attackers found themselves facing not just an armed and trained teenager, but also Roman's support team, which had been shadowing Lindsay from concealed positions. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, 2 attackers were dead and the third was wounded and in custody. But Roman wasn't satisfied. This had been a probing attack, designed to test their defenses and identify their capabilities. Jerome's learning, Roman told Lindsay as they reviewed tactical footage of the incident. He's adapting to our capabilities. The next attempt will be more sophisticated. The next attempt came 2 days later, and it was indeed more sophisticated. Instead of a direct assault, Jerome's remaining handlers tried psychological warfare. They released fabricated evidence suggesting that Roman had been working with foreign intelligence services himself, that his entire military career had been a cover for treason, and that the recent network destruction had been designed to eliminate competition rather than protect American interests. The disinformation campaign was professional and well-crafted, designed to turn American intelligence agencies against Roman and isolate him from official support. For a brief period, it worked. Several of Roman's government contacts stopped returning his calls, and Agent Mitchell informed him that he was being investigated for possible foreign connections. But Roman had anticipated this kind of attack and prepared accordingly. Over the years, he had maintained relationships with retired intelligence personnel who knew his true character and could vouch for his loyalty. More importantly, He had documented evidence of Jerome's network that proved beyond any doubt which side he was actually fighting for. Character assassination, Roman explained to Lindsay as they watched the false accusations spread through social media and alternative news sites. Classic technique when you can't eliminate someone physically. Turn their own people against them. Will it work? Roman smiled coldly. Jerome is about to discover that I have friends in very high places, and that some of those friends have been waiting for an excuse to eliminate foreign intelligence operations on American soil with extreme prejudice. The counter-disinformation campaign was swift and devastating. Within 48 hours, Jerome's fabricated evidence had been thoroughly debunked by independent analysts, and the sources of the false information had been traced back to known foreign intelligence assets. Instead of turning American agencies against Roman, the campaign had actually provided them with evidence of ongoing foreign intelligence activities that required immediate response. Authorization granted, Agent Mitchell informed Roman during a secure video conference. Full operational authority to eliminate Jerome Massey and any remaining network assets by any means necessary. No restrictions, no oversight, no questions asked afterward. Roman had been given what amounted to a hunting license from the United States government. Jerome Massey was now officially considered an enemy combatant operating on American soil, and Roman Reynolds was authorized to eliminate him using whatever methods he deemed appropriate. Where is he? Roman asked. Best intelligence suggests he's operating from a compound in rural West Virginia, Mitchell replied. Remote location, multiple escape routes, heavily defended. He's planning something big. Our sources suggest a major operation designed to retaliate for the network destruction. Roman studied the satellite imagery of Jerome's compound, his tactical mind automatically cataloging approaches, defenses, and vulnerabilities. This would be more than just a rescue operation or a simple elimination. This would be a direct assault against a fortified position defended by experienced operators. How many people? Roman asked. At least 12, possibly as many as 20. Mix of foreign intelligence operatives and hired mercenaries. Well-armed, well-trained, highly motivated. Roman nodded slowly. This was exactly the kind of operation he'd specialized in during his military career. High-risk assault against defended positions with minimal friendly casualties and maximum enemy elimination. I'll need a team, Roman said. You'll have whatever you need, Mitchell assured him. This is now a national security priority. Jerome Massey and his network have been classified as a clear and present danger to the United States. Eliminate them. As Roman began planning the assault, he felt the familiar cold clarity that preceded major operations. This wasn't just about protecting his family anymore. This was about ending a threat to American security that had been operating undetected for over a decade. Jerome Massey had made a fundamental error when he decided to target Roman Reynolds. He thought he was dealing with a soft suburban target who could be manipulated and eliminated. Instead, he declared war on someone who spent 20 years perfecting the art of eliminating people who threatened American interests. Now Jerome was about to learn the difference between intelligence operations and military operations. The difference between manipulation and direct action. The difference between thinking you're a predator and actually meeting one. Chapter 9, Final Justice. The assault on Jerome's compound began at 0300 hours on a moonless night in late October. Roman led a team of 12 elite operators, a mix of active duty special forces personnel and retired intelligence operatives who had volunteered for what was officially classified as a counterterrorism operation against foreign assets. Jerome had chosen his location well. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by wooded hills, with clear sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes through underground tunnels. Motion sensors and infrared cameras provided early warning, while strategically placed obstacles would channel any assault force into predetermined kill zones. It was exactly the kind of defensive position that would stop a conventional attack cold. Unfortunately for Jerome, Roman Reynolds had never been conventional. Overwatch in position came the voice of his sniper team leader, Sarah Chun, who had volunteered to provide long-range support from a ridgeline 800 meters away. I count 14 targets visible, probable additional personnel in the main building. Roger that, Overwatch. Phoenix team, status report. Phoenix team ready, responded Marcus Webb, leading the four-man element that would assault the compound from the north. Charges placed on target building. Awaiting your signal. Shadow team ready, added Lisa Park, whose team would handle the tunnel systems. Multiple escape routes identified and covered. Roman checked his equipment one final time. Assault rifle, sidearm, grenades, breaching charges, and the specialized ammunition he'd developed during his military career for dealing with body armor and hardened targets. Everything was configured for maximum lethality with minimum collateral damage. All teams, this is Control, Roman said into his radio. Execute Operation Payback in 30 seconds. Remember, no quarter, no prisoners, no survivors. These people have been operating on American soil for over a decade, and they killed federal agents during their escape. They've forfeited any right to mercy. The assault began with Sarah's sniper rifle eliminating the 2 sentries on the compound's perimeter in quick succession. Before Jerome's people could react to the loss of their early warning system, Roman's breaching charges destroyed the main gate, and Phoenix team was pouring through the gap with automatic weapons blazing. Jerome had trained his people well. They responded to the assault with professional competence, falling back to prepare positions and laying down disciplined covering fire. But they were defending against someone who had spent 20 years studying how to break exactly this kind of defense. Roman moved through the compound like death incarnate, his rifle finding targets with mechanical precision while his team eliminated defenders with ruthless efficiency. The defenders were good, but Roman's team was better, and they had the advantage of surprise, superior equipment, and absolute motivation. Building secured, reported Phoenix team leader Webb. 6 enemy Kia, no friendly casualties. Tunnel systems secured, added Shadow team leader Park. 2 enemy eliminated attempting to escape through the underground route. No escapees. Roman reached the main building and kicked in the door, finding Jerome Massey in what appeared to be a command center filled with communications equipment, computers, and wall-mounted displays showing surveillance footage from around the compound. Jerome stood behind a desk with his hands raised, clearly recognizing that resistance was futile. Roman, Jerome said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. I have to admit, I underestimated you from the beginning. Yes, you did, Roman replied, keeping his rifle trained on Jerome's center mass. You thought you were dealing with a soft, suburban target. Instead, you declared war on someone who's very, very good at war. I suppose you're here to kill me. That was the plan, Roman said. But first, you're going to tell me about the operation you've been planning. The major retaliation my sources have been tracking. Jerome smiled, and Roman recognized the expression of someone who believed they still held winning cards. You think this compound is the end of it? You think eliminating my network was a victory? Roman, you have no idea what you've really accomplished. Enlighten me. You've proven that American intelligence networks are vulnerable to infiltration and manipulation. You've demonstrated that private citizens can conduct military operations on American soil without meaningful government oversight. Most importantly, you've shown foreign intelligence services exactly how to identify, target, and eliminate American intelligence personnel. Jerome gestured to the equipment around them. Everything that's happened here, every technique you've used, every tactical decision you've made, has been recorded and transmitted to intelligence services in Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, and a dozen other capitals. You think you've been protecting American security? You've actually been providing foreign powers with a masterclass in how to destroy it. Roman felt a chill of recognition. Jerome was right. Every tactical technique, every operational methodology, every security protocol Roman had employed during the network destruction had been observed and analyzed by hostile intelligence services. Instead of protecting American security, Roman had inadvertently provided enemies with detailed intelligence about American counterintelligence capabilities. You're lying, Roman said, but doubt was creeping into his voice. Check the computers, Jerome said confidently. Everything has been live-streamed to secure servers around the world. Your face, your methods, your team's capabilities, all of it now part of training materials being distributed to foreign intelligence academies. Roman moved to the nearest computer terminal while keeping his weapon trained on Jerome. The screen showed active video feeds being transmitted to multiple international locations, along with analytical software that was cataloging and categorizing every aspect of the assault in real time. Months of planning, Jerome continued. The entire network, the assassination attempt, even my escape from federal custody, all of it designed to draw you into exactly this kind of operation. You're not hunting us, Roman. We're studying you. Roman's finger tightened on the trigger as he realized the full scope of Jerome's deception. The man hadn't just infiltrated Roman's family. He manipulated Roman himself into becoming an intelligence asset for foreign powers. Last words, Roman asked. Jerome's smile widened. Look behind you. Roman spun around to find Lindsay standing in the doorway of the command center, but she wasn't alone. Flanking her were two armed men Roman didn't recognize, and Lindsay's hands were bound behind her back. Hello, Father, Lindsay said, but her voice carried an accent that hadn't been there before, the same accent Roman had heard during Jerome's phone conversations. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about family loyalty. Roman's world tilted as he realized the final, devastating truth. Lindsay hadn't been an unwilling asset or an innocent victim. She'd been a deep-cover operative from the beginning, placed with Thelma when she was still a baby and raised specifically to infiltrate Roman's life. 16 years. Lindsay continued, her voice now cold and professional. 16 years of pretending to be your daughter, learning your methods, studying your capabilities, waiting for the moment when you would finally reveal your true potential. The warning, Roman said, understanding flooding through him. You warned me about the assassination attempt. Because the assassination was never meant to succeed, Lindsay replied. It was designed to activate you, to force you to reveal the full extent of your training and capabilities. Every decision you've made since that night has been observed, recorded, and analyzed by intelligence services around the world. Roman raised his rifle, but hesitated as he looked at the girl he'd raised as his daughter for 16 years. Despite everything, the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies, some part of him still saw the child who had asked him to help with homework, who had sought his comfort during nightmares, who had learned to drive in his car. I do love you, you know, Lindsay said softly. In my own way. You taught me right from wrong, just like you said. You show me what real strength looks like. But you also taught me that family is about choice, not genetics. And I've chosen my real family. Your real family? Roman asked. The intelligence service that gave me purpose, Lindsay replied. The mission that gave my life meaning. The cause that's bigger than any one person or country. Roman felt the last pieces of his old life crumbling away. His wife had been an enemy agent. His daughter was a deep-cover operative. His family had been alive from the very beginning. But as he stood in that command center, surrounded by enemies and facing the ultimate betrayal, Roman felt something unexpected, relief. The guilt he'd carried about potentially putting Lindsay in danger, the concern about her emotional well-being, the careful balance between training her for dangerous situations while trying to preserve her innocence. All of it was suddenly irrelevant. Lindsay wasn't his daughter. She was an enemy combatant who had spent 16 years infiltrating his life and stealing his secrets. And Roman Reynolds had spent 20 years learning how to eliminate enemy combatants with extreme prejudice. Thank you, Roman said quietly. For what? Lindsay asked, momentarily confused by his calm response. For finally giving me permission to stop holding back. Roman's transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The conflicted father disappeared, replaced by the apex predator who had earned his reputation in the darkest corners of foreign wars. His rifle came up within human speed, and his first shot took down one of Lindsay's guards before anyone could react. The second guard tried to use Lindsay as a shield, but Roman's second shot went through her shoulder and into the guard center mass. Lindsay screamed and fell as Jerome tried to draw a concealed weapon, but Roman's third shot ended that threat permanently. As Lindsay lay on the floor, bleeding but alive, She looked up at Roman with a mixture of pain and something that might have been respect. "You really are everything they said you were," she gasped. "And you're exactly what I spent 20 years learning to eliminate," Roman replied. "An enemy asset operating on American soil. So what happens now?" Lindsay asked. Roman looked down at the girl who had pretended to be his daughter for 16 years, who had manipulated his emotions and stolen his secrets, who had been willing to sacrifice his life for the sake of her mission. She was wounded, but not critically, and she was still valuable as an intelligence asset. But Roman Reynolds never forgave betrayal, and he never forgot those who threatened what he loved. Lindsay had made her choice when she'd chosen her real family over the man who had raised her. "Now you learn the difference between thinking you're a predator and actually meeting one," Roman said, and pulled the trigger.